Alright, we have a lot of ground to cover today, so hang on tight. First, filming commenced in Tunisia, where Lucas and company selected the town of Ajim on the island of Jerba, which is just off the western coast of Africa. The foreign architecture there appealed to them, and they were able to supplement it with facades to give the appearance of a spaceport. The exterior shots of the building that would serve as the cantina were filmed April 2nd and 3rd, 1976. This, of course, was just the exterior. The real cantina was constructed at Stage 6 at Elstree Studios in England. Records say that at least 42 extras, but probably more, were hired to populate the intricate set and turn it into a hive of scum and villainy. The filming of Scene 50 began April 13th and continued on until the 20th. Despite the stress and difficulty associated with making the first Star Wars movie, there are no accounts of any major problems filming the scene. Art director Norman Reynolds said, "I think we felt perhaps not quite as much pressure as the makeup department, because they had a lot to do. Star Wars has melded in my memory into one general sort of constant panic, but the cantina doesn't leap out especially. Actually, the panic would come later, when the finished product was viewed." We have mentioned the original edit of the unfinished film, referred to as the Lost Cut, which was done by John Jempson. In this original version, the cantina scene has a completely different pacing, with a panning, documentary-type feel, lingering too long on the bizarre creatures like a gawking spectator. In fact, in its first release on the 1998 Behind the Magic CD-ROM, it is presented on the same screen above the version from the final film, which actually has to pause several times to allow the lost cut to catch up. After a less than successful screening of this cut held at George Lucas's house, the director determined to tighten up and recut his entire film, and together he, his wife Marcia, Paul Hirsch, and Richard Chew gave the film the vibrancy and energy that we are all now used to. The blueprints that we looked at in a previous chapter called for the bar itself to be made of perspex, which would, quote, run the length of the bar and, quote, be lit from behind. The seams in the bar are far less evident in the film than in this on-set photo, which provides a clue that this lighting idea was perhaps tried and ultimately not used, or at least toned down quite a bit.
211, take 3, guide track. Action! Sorry.
Can I take another one?
Improving and rejiggering the film involved the shooting of extra scenes, done in January and February of 1977. A big part of the budget for these additions went to the construction and filming of the extra aliens that Rick Baker and his team had created, including the replacement Greedo shots. This additional cantina filming took place on January 24th and 25th at Dovington's, a small studio in Hollywood that not much is actually known about. Shooting more cantina footage meant that at least part of the cantina set had to be rebuilt, and this was accomplished in a very clever way, by building one alcove that could be reversed and redressed as needed for each different group of creatures, giving the appearance of multiple rooms. We can show this by taking a closer look at this photo. Luckily, we can be 100% sure that it's not flipped horizontally as Star Wars photos sometimes are because of the visible logo on this moving box. Pay special attention to this spot of plaster at the top of the half of an arched wall. Now, look at this photo. There's the same spot, now on the inside corner. Also, notice that the red and blue lines that decorate the outside of cantina walls and arches were painted on both sides of the half wall, so that it would always look correct, even though this really didn't show up in the final film. By making minor changes to the interior of the booth, this ingenious method allowed for the filming of 8 different alcove setups, which we are going to look at now. Please note, the order I have assigned to these alcoves is completely arbitrary. The only thing that we can be sure of is that Hammerhead's table was the first one filmed. This first alcove has 4 lights on the right side, in the order of red, blue, blue, red. There are 2 light fixtures to the right of the window, as well as a bench to the right with stools in the center and left. In the second alcove are the same 4 lights, unchanged from the previous setup, and no light fixtures on the wall. There is more seating in the room as this is the most crowded of all the alcoves. The third alcove still keeps the same 4 lights unchanged from the previous setup, with the 2 light fixtures identical to the first alcove, which is barely quickly visible in the final film. Alcove number 4 has a molding strip on the right wall, just as Han Solo's booth in the cantina had. There are now colored lights to the right of the window from top to bottom, blue, blue, and red, with a bench on the right and 2 other stools. The fifth alcove has the same 4 lights we have seen before, with no light fixtures that can be seen. Alcove number 6 is the one for the cantina band. It has no colored lights at all, no light fixtures, with stools for the 2 seated band members, which admittedly can be hard to see. There are 2 strange chrome containers occasionally visible behind the band, which we can get a much better look at in this photo we saw earlier. According to Doug Beswick, about 4 weeks into their 6-week assignment, Lucas and producer Gary Kurtz dropped by to check on their progress, and stopped to look at the alien that Beswick was working on. Quote, "It was just supposed to be another one of the heads in the group. Then they sort of huddled together and came back and said, 'Hey, could you make more of this guy?' And I said, 'Sure, we can make as many as you want.' And they said, 'We want to have a little combo in the barroom scene.' That was the first we had heard of it." Making up the band of 7, and yes, there are actually 7, were Lane Liska, Phil Tippett, John Berg, Doug Beswick, and 3 production secretaries from ILM. Rick Baker, already committed to The Incredible Melting Man, was unable to be at the actual filming by his own admission. Since the band was intended to be moving to their own music, Lucas played a recording of Benny Goodman's Sing, Sing, Sing on set for the actors to mime along with. The band was filmed 3 times for about 20 minutes each, and an amusing story came from those takes. Since the only opening in the Cantina band masks ended up being plugged up with an instrument, several performers nearly passed out. "It was a lot of fun watching the dailies," said Rick Baker. "All of a sudden, one guy would stand up and point to his mouth for oxygen. There was also some funny stuff where the heads caved in. They were breathing so hard, the whole head was contracting and expanding." Eventually, producer Gary Kurtz saved the day by going around with a razor blade or knife and slicing gills into the curvatures of the masks, to everyone's great relief when the air came rushing in. The 7th alcove setup belongs to the pair of Duros aliens, and admittedly the spot chosen to film them may not be a unique alcove setup at all. In the film, there is a quick reaction shot to Greedo's death, where the Duros are shown again and appear to be seated, like in this photo. This could have been filmed in any booth configuration that we have seen and may not be a unique setup. This first attempt at filming Greedo's close-ups contains 2 lights to his left, blue and red. To his right is a unique lantern fixture. What we can't see in this photo is whether there is a table in the background over Greedo's shoulder at this point. Note the presence of R2-D2 in the left side of the photo. This tells us that other pickup shots were filmed during the 2 days at Dovington's, which does make sense, because he's certainly not in any of the scenes that concern us here. For the final setup that was used, the lantern was removed, leaving a large medallion to the right of Greedo's head, which matches the London filming. The website partsofstarwars.com notes that ILM Secretary Maria de Aragon wore a pair of Duros hands for this shoot. Several photos show that Greedo was having difficulty keeping the gun still. So Lucas devised a pile of objects, including a roll of tape, to rest it on. I've always wanted to say this. You may be aware that Tarkin was in fuzzy slippers, but did you know that Greedo was wearing high heels? In this photo, George just noticed. At the table, which is visible over Greedo's shoulder, is the Side or Mayo alien with his back to the camera, and one Duros who is wearing the same large jacket as the Wolfman with the light-up eyes. This Duros is played by a young girl who is probably another member of the staff at ILM. If you've ever wondered what alien does the walk-by over Greedo's shoulder during his close-ups, the answer is that a third Godel, or High Tundra, was made by throwing the mask together with whatever was lying around. We will cover him and his 2 goat brethren in Chapter 6. This group of photos is a little confusing. It appears that Lucas wanted to try a close-up of Greedo standing up, and therefore had to use this finished back wall. At least that's the best I can come up with. Artist and designer Susie Rice, who had been hired by George Lucas to design the bid brochure for the film, and in doing so created the famous Star Wars logo as well, stopped by the Dovington studio to receive Lucas's final approval on the brochure so that it could be printed. On her website, she recounts a very amusing story about this event. Quote, "This later meeting was held at a soundstage in Midtown Los Angeles where, from behind a nondescript storefront south of Hollywood Boulevard, accessible directly from the city sidewalk along a major street, Greedo answered the door. An actor in Greedo's makeup and costume opened the door, smoking a cigarette out of a straw affixed to the end of Greedo's nose, and smoke billowed out all around the edges of Greedo's face, from neck to brow. By that time, I wasn't surprised at anything. Downtown Los Angeles, city sidewalk opening to filming, Greedo smoking a cigarette out of a straw stuck in his nose, Los Angeles. So I walked past Greedo and found George in the back directing the filming of inserts for the bar scene. Big moment seeing him directing film footage." An attempt at upgrading the gore in Walrus Man's death was filmed, but cooler heads, pun intended, prevailed. This included doing the same for his severed arm, which was actually changed into one with a hairy hand and fingers, supposedly because George Lucas felt the original one would not be able to properly hold a gun, and in doing so created what may be the very first Star Wars anachronism. And look what a surprised audience at Star Wars Celebration 6 in 2012 got to see. George Lucas is famously quoted as saying, "Sound is 50% of the picture, and it's definitely crucial to adding a sense of believability to impossible situations." Enter Ben Burtt, born 1948, Jamesville, New York. Lucas, looking to hire someone from his own alma mater of USC, had Burtt recommended to him by a professor from the School of Cinema. Burtt had grown up as someone fascinated with sound and its manipulation, and had collected a personal library of his own sounds. At the time Burtt accepted the job, he had only seen the handful of Ralph McQuarrie's early production paintings. The rest, of course, is history, but for our purposes here, the book, The Sounds of Star Wars, spends a few pages talking with Burtt about how some specific Cantina sounds and voices were made. Besides using outtakes and unused bits that were left over from the creation of the voices for R2-D2 and the Jawas, Burtt used several techniques to create the background crowd sounds, what is known in the industry as walla, for the Cantina. Several crew and staff members volunteered to help. Burtt rented a tank of helium, and the group spent several hilarious hours inhaling it and attempting to talk to each other. The results were recorded and manipulated by Burtt to create the background chatter in the Cantina. Specific alien voices were created by using other methods. One alien voice was a friend of Burtt's reading Latin aloud, which Burtt processed through a synthesizer. The sounds of a hippopotamus, a spring peeper tree frog, and laughing hyenas were also used. The voices for the two Juros aliens were created by chopping up a recording of someone speaking Swahili. The sounds for the lovable Muftak are actually Ben Burtt's own voice processed through an ARP synthesizer. Ironically, the sounds Walrus Man makes originated from an actual walrus. When developing a voice for Greedo, Burt was interested in the ancient Incan language of Quechua, but couldn't find anyone who could speak it. He was led to a Berkeley student named Larry Ward, who could speak 11 languages. Ward did not actually speak Quechua, but could very convincingly imitate it, and together he and Burt timed phrases to fit the mouth movements of Greedo's mask, and between the two of them effectively invented the beginnings of the Huttese language. Once recorded, the voice track was doubled and phased to produce the desired effect. No book or documentary about any facet of Star Wars should leave out the music of John Williams. The amazing soundtracks that Williams wrote are as much a vital component of the films as any other. When it came to George Lucas's bar scene, he knew that he wanted something different. In an interview, John Williams told the story of seeing the finished scene without music, and he was baffled at what sounds these aliens would actually be playing. Asking Lucas about it, the director said, quote, "Well, I have an idea. What if these little creatures on this planet way out someplace came upon a rock, and they lifted up the rock, and underneath was sheet music from Benny Goodman's great swing band of the 1930s on planet Earth, and they looked at this music and they kind of deciphered it, but they didn't quite know how it should go, but they tried. And, why don't you try doing that? What would these space creatures, what would their imitation of Benny Goodman sound like?" So Williams delivered, and the result was two pieces, Cantina Band, later renamed Mad About Me in Universe, and Cantina Band 2, that would be impossible to imagine the scene without. In fact, besides the Star Wars opening theme, it is probably the most recognizable music in all the films. Williams described the instrumentation and its effect on the charm of the recording. Quote, "We didn't have electronic instruments exactly in that period very much. They're all little Trinidad steel drums and out-of-tune kazoos and little reed instruments, you know. It was all done acoustically. It wasn't an electronic preparation as it probably would have been done today. I think that may be also part of its success, because being acoustic it meant people had to blow the notes and make all the sounds, a little out of tune and a little behind there, a little ahead there. It had all the foibles of a not very good human performance." Star Wars fans are more than familiar with the changes that George Lucas has made to the Cantina scene over the years, especially with regard to who shot first. When the Plus streaming service launched in the fall of 2019, fans received another shock. The scene had been altered again. Now, right before the dual blaster fire, we are treated to reused frames of an angry Greedo yelling, "McClunky!" Fans were instantly perplexed. Dozens of articles reported on the change, and after a few days it was announced that this alteration was made by George Lucas himself, quote, "sometime before the sale to in 2012. Although it can't be too long before, though, because it certainly wasn't included in the 2011 Blu-ray set. What nobody reported on, though, was that the voice was Larry Ward's, and it certainly sounds like him to my ears, meaning that this was an actual unused vintage piece of dialogue. In fact, one article pointed out that the phrase, which means, "I will end you," was actually used in The Phantom Menace, spoken to Anakin by Sebulba. Pronounced a little differently, but it's there. Maybe that was part of Lucas's reasoning for making yet another unnecessary change?
The world may never know.
Next time, it's here, it's finally here. Next time, we will begin our A to Z look at every single Cantina guest, starting with Elstree Studios in Chapter 5. We will see them all from Athlo to Zutton. You might want to bring a snack.
I don't think they'd like another killing in here.
They'd hardly notice.